and to move that the House take note of a matter of urgent public importance. Jacinda Ardern.
Mr Speaker, I so move. Every single New Zealander, Mr Speaker, has a right to feel concerned about this massive breach of privacy that has occurred within the Ministry of Social Development. This is by far, Mr Speaker, the worst breach of privacy that I have seen, not just as a Member of Parliament, but as a citizen. And I would bet that every single member in this House would be severely challenged to find a breach more serious than this one. But there is actually some competition for that title, Mr Speaker. In recent times, we have seen breaches by both ACC and IRD, serious breaches. And in fact, ACC in particular grabbed the headlines for a long period of time, and I expect that this breach will do the same. And this time, we add the Ministry of Social Development to that list. Unlike ACC, where specific information was sent to an individual claimant, this breach is different. In this breach, Mr Speaker, any member of the public could have walked and did walk into a work and income office and accessed a publicly available kiosk to view the personal and private information of some of our most vulnerable New Zealanders. It is utterly astounding that that could happen in this country. But it points, Mr Speaker, to a cavalier approach to privacy and to the protection of information by this government. And the buck has to stop somewhere, Mr Speaker. It is all well and good for ministers time and time again to stand up and call these issues operational. The protection of information held by the government goes to the heart of people's trust in the state. This cannot be left as an operational matter to public servants. This is a matter very much at the heart of what the government must be doing and must be held to account for. But we saw today, Mr Speaker, the level of accountability this minister wants to take. She was quick to say this was an operational matter, and we will come to whether or not that is a fair claim. But first, let's review the background of what has happened in this incident. Recently, an individual who wished to stay anonymous encountered an issue with work and income kiosks. And let's be clear about the vulnerability in the system. This individual did not hack into work and income systems. Unlike what the Prime Minister has implied, and at times the Minister, they did not need to know what they were looking for to find this information. They only needed to know how to use a mouse and click it as little as 3 times. They literally clicked on Open File in Microsoft Office in order to access this vital and key information, Mr Speaker. Linking a public work and income kiosk system to the main database of MSD is unforgivable in this day and age. And even the most lay of person when it comes to IT issues would understand that that would be a risk and would put vulnerable people at risk. That individual who discovered that issue contacted MSD, and took several days for MSD to respond to their original call. And the main query they had was, like Facebook or Google, did they give any kind of remuneration for vulnerability testing of systems? MSD responded last Wednesday, but in the intervening period, Keith Ning, a blogger and an investigative journalist, had been approached by this individual. Keith took a look himself, and Mr Speaker, what he found was devastating. Let's start at the top. Firstly, contractors' information, full names, hours worked, pay rates, pay details for all MSD contract workers, including for media trainers, probably coming in handy at this present time. Secondly, doctors and radiology invoices with full names of candidates for adoption, foster parents, and limited service volunteer candidates, some of our most young and vulnerable on government support. In others, there were invoices from doctors and radiology for X-rays, Mr Speaker, of children in care and protection, with their full names, their chief complaint, the cause of their abuse. Some of these were X-rays for injuries and broken limbs. There was debt collection information. MEC's data collection units, use VADA for their debt collection needs, and when they invoice, they include a list of the people who owe them money. But then there are the invoices that relate most specifically to our most vulnerable children. There were phone bills from Telecom for SIF's family homes and care and protection facilities. Now, whilst some of this information may be publicly available, what would of course not be known is who resides there and the phone logs that were made to those addresses. There were pharmacy invoices, including prescriptions that not only identify children in SIF's care, but the medication they are taking, including antidepressants and in some cases cancer-related medication. There were legal bills that in some cases included historical claims against SIFs, obviously in some cases for abuse. The availability of this information, Mr. Speaker, is an indictment on this government and, it has to be said, on this minister. Now, she may claim, as she has done in the House today, that this was an operational matter. But in 2009, Mr. Speaker, she wrote a letter to Bill English as part of her review of the finding value for money within her government department, as all departments did. And when she wrote to Bill English, she said the following: whilst the ministry has a strong focus on reducing its national office numbers, there are also substantial plans to automate frontline services for clients through the use of online and other IT solutions. A specific reference to the use of kiosks in work and income offices. She went on to say, I will be monitoring the progress of these plans regularly with the ministry's chief executive. Mr. Speaker, quite clearly, the minister did not do that. She did not monitor the automation of those services. She didn't even follow what the Ministry of Social Development had done in terms of review. And Mr. Speaker, even the ministry themselves undertook external reviews which found vulnerabilities which this minister did not even know about. How can she claim that this was an operational matter when she told her own Minister of Finance she would monitor it, and clearly she did not? She has claimed, Mr. Speaker, that it is, quote, disturbing that her department did not act on vulnerabilities that were identified by an IT analysis. I find it disturbing that she did not act. I find it disturbing that she did not know such a flaw in her own system. But, Mr. Speaker, let's come to what was happening within ICT, within MSD generally. Let's be clear, these systems were developed in-house. It was not a contracted activity originally. It was in-house by her staff and by her team, and the systems were rolled out in 2010. At almost the same time, Treasury was asking government departments to save $130 million per annum in ICT costs. Something had to give, Mr. Speaker, and quite clearly it did. There were also contractors involved. This is true. There has been some suggestion that those ICT contractors themselves failed. In fact, MSD implied that in some of their media conferences yesterday. But now they have retracted and stated that they are not sure or can no longer be confident that MSD even followed up on a report from Dimension Data in April last year, which MSD paid them $10,000 to complete, that they didn't even follow up on the flaws that that company identified. Dimension Data raised issues with MSD. MSD paid them $10,000 to do that and then did nothing to follow up the problems they identified. Mr. Speaker, that is an absolute outrage. The fact that this problem could have been prevented and wasn't is an absolute outrage. And it wasn't just an ICT company paid by MSD who found this problem. It's also being raised at a beneficiary advocacy group. Over a year ago, raised with the Ministry of Social Development issues with their system. Now, there are two options, Mr. Speaker. Either they didn't act on that information, or they simply didn't know what they were meant to be looking for. Either way, it is an epic fail, and this ministry has shown that it cannot be trusted with the personal, private information of vulnerable individuals. But, Mr. Speaker, there is another matter that the Minister has referred to in the past week, which is now being drawn into this debate, and that is the issue of the White Paper on vulnerable children. The children affected by this breach will, in most cases, be the very same children the Minister wants to protect through her White Paper, which has been totally undermined by this incident. Now, the Minister's plan hinges, Mr. Speaker, on vulnerable children, a database of vulnerable children being established and information shared. She herself acknowledges that faith in the system is critical for this database's success. In the White Paper, she says, while there is much to gain from better information sharing about vulnerable children and their families, there are also associated risks, including a possible reluctance to use services if there is a perception that information will be shared. We have more than a perception that information will be shared. We have a perception now that information will be severely compromised. She goes on to point out that a similar system in the UK was dumped in 2010, in part because of concerns about the security of the system. She states, on the basis of this experience, there are 4 key elements required for the system. Social, and that she lists trust within and between agencies, a legal framework, resources, and finally, technical. System capability is part of the solution, but trust that personal information will be shared when necessary and with the right people should underpin computer system design. Mr. Speaker, she herself has identified the very issue that could bring down the key element of her White Paper, and it has already happened before she has even started. 2 of the 4 elements that she says are needed no longer exist. Mr. Speaker, it is key that we do something to support, assist and prevent young children in this country being abused. But the Minister has undermined her own ability to achieve that and must rebuild the faith in her department's ability to hold and use information appropriately. But can this Minister do it herself with the record that she herself has? Not only was external testing not followed up, not only were public complaints not followed up, but the culture that she presides over through her own leadership is highly questionable. It wasn't that long ago that the Privacy Commissioner was directly involved with this Minister over the release of personal details of someone on government support. She was willing to release someone's private information in order to deflect from the bigger issue around her leadership of welfare at that time. And she was unrepentant, even saying she would do it again. Now, Mr. Speaker, she has assured the House that she hasn't given the personal information of the original informant around the vulnerabilities of her system to the media. But we can be utterly forgiven for asking. MSD advised her office of Ira Bailey's name on Wednesday. On Thursday, the Minister's own political advisor looked at Ira Bailey's LinkedIn profile. On Sunday, the story broke. On Monday, the New Zealand Herald suddenly had the name of that individual. And when so few people knew his identity, Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely right that the opposition asks, in order to figure out whether or not the Minister was trying to detract from what is the most pertinent issue here, and that is her ministry's utter incompetence in dealing with the information of vulnerable New Zealand citizens. Mr. Speaker, the members of the public will make their own judgment as to whether or not this Minister and her department can be trusted with the information of our most vulnerable citizens. But this opposition will continue to hold that government to account for what is clearly a systemic issue and a massive, massive failure.
Mr Speaker.
I call